Welcome to another episode of Master Coach. Master Coach is an interview series in which we talk to people who are master coaches. What is a master coach? A master coach is somebody who has succeeded in a field and then turned around and coached other people to succeed in that field as well. Today we're talking to Henry Cloud. Henry Cloud is a psychologist. You've probably heard of him. He has sold millions of books and he has succeeded as a coach, but he was doing a lot more before he was coaching. What is it? How did he do it? We're going to talk about all of that in today's interview with Henry Cloud. Hey everybody, welcome to Coach Builder Master Coach. This is our second Master Coach interview, and we have Dr. Henry Cloud with us today. Well, the idea of a Master Coach is somebody who has succeeded at the highest level in some field and then turned around and taught other people how to succeed, usually in that field. And you fit that qualification. A lot of people probably think of you as an author. Boundaries was a big book. Trust, Integrity, Necessary Endings. There's been a bunch of really big books. They think of you as an author and a coach, but they don't realize you actually owned a chain or whatever of hospitals in your 20s and mental health facilities. You were a practicing psychologist. You had a radio show. It's been quite a ride for you.
Just didn't know what was coming next, but you just strap yourself in.
Yeah. Well, I want to know, growing up in Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
You grew up in Mississippi. How old were you when you
I didn't grow too tall, but I grew up.
You grew up in the South, the deep South. And how did that influence your becoming who you are today?
Wow. Where would I even try to make this short, which I have to do? I think a big part of it was my family, my dad and mom. But my dad especially, I'll tell you a little story about him. He was a teenager. I had older parents when I was born, so I was an oops.
How old were your parents when you were born?
40-something.
Did you have siblings that had already?
Yeah, way done. Married when I was born, or about to get married.
What's the distance between you and the?
There's 18 years.
So you were essentially an only child.
I was an oops. When I was a teenager, I went to my dad and said, I figured out the math. I said, I wasn't playing, was it? And he goes, well, we've always tried to make the most of our mistakes. That's what he said. But my dad, he was a teenager, late teenager, and went into the National Guard, and World War II came. And they recruited him, and they gave him an IQ test, and he was like 160 or something.
Wow.
And
that's genius, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But he was really uneducated. His dad died when he was 7 and didn't finish high school because he had to go to work. But he had a good brain, and so they put him into leadership development, and he went
in the military.
In the military.
Army.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was in Europe during the war for 4 or 5 years. And
was he married at the time, or was he?
Yeah, he was married and had a 2-year-old. Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm saying all this to make one point about what influenced me. I think was just one story. When he went to Europe, they put him in head of an intelligence unit that constructed all the models for the battlefields for Patton and the generals, because we didn't have computers. So they recruited Hollywood set builders to build these rooms of mountain ranges and all this kind of stuff so the generals could come in and plan the battles. So he was over, in the first part of being in Europe for 2 years, he was over these non-soldiers. It was like F Troop or something. And he kind of felt sorry for these guys. They were all from Hollywood. They weren't so bombs going off in Europe and they're scared.
Yeah.
So he got in a craps game one night and he wins a bunch of money. He, under the radar, because it's illegal, he went and bought a restaurant.
Where?
Henley-on-Thames.
In London?
Outside of London.
Wow.
Bought a restaurant, found an old couple and put them in charge of it and said, act like this is yours. Okay? But every Saturday night, and he had, tea was rationed in England, so he had a lot of tea from the Army. So he would get in his Jeep during the week and go out and trade tea for chickens and potatoes because the food sucked in the Army, and bring them back, give them to the couple. Every Saturday night, I want you to shut it down. And throw a party for the American soldiers and their dates. Fried chicken and French fries.
Wow.
Don't ever tell him I'm behind it. Did that for 2 years, and when he left, he gave the restaurant to the couple.
You are kidding.
Yeah, and that's just an example. And then he came back and he started his own business.
Well, that says so much. It's altruism. It's an eye for fun.
It's entrepreneurial.
Incredible entrepreneurialism.
Yeah.
And a lack of scarcity, right? A mindset that isn't, especially in that time in American history, and then being over in
Europe.
Yeah, during the war, there wasn't a clingingness.
Right. But what I grew up seeing was he loved business. He started a company and did well and was in business for 40 years. By the way, when he sold it, he retired in his early 60s, he gave the company to the employees.
Gave it.
Turned it over to him.
Wow.
All the equipment,
What was
bulldozers. He had a contracting company, and he had a General Electric dealership.
Okay.
Back then you had brand dealerships. But the point is, he always used his business. He was like a social worker. He always used his business, take kids off the street, teach them how to read blueprints, turn them into foremen. He always used his business as a passion to help. And so you say, what influenced me? I was started out in a helping profession, which I still am in as a psychologist, but I had this business, chip.
Right.
And so I wasn't thinking, but to merge the two, I think that growing up in Mississippi, that's what I saw my parents were.
Was there a difference between the way maybe your brothers and sisters grew up and the way you grew up? 2 sisters older than you. Difference between the way the parents they got and the parents you got? Being 18-year difference. And I'm just really curious about that.
Well, they look back at me, and, I'm the spoiled brat, right? I grew up.
But I mean, your parents had to be a lot more wise and maybe available.
Especially available.
Yeah.
Because my dad, by then he had his company, and I think he got to live out the childhood that he never got with me. So we were always, playing golf and fishing.
Yeah. You had a good relationship with your dad.
Yeah, he took me everywhere.
Oh, that's incredible.
Literally took me everywhere. When I was 4 years old, 5 years old, he'd get me out of bed 6 o'clock in the morning, go down, and he'd put me with the crew to go out. I'd have my little brown lunch bag, and I'd ride on the bulldozer and sit in the guy's lap, and he always took me to work.
How did that affect your life moving forward, where you just saw men working and working hard, it sounds like?
And also had to work for them.
Yeah.
He would tell them,
have them go fetch tools.
You're his boss. Don't come to me if he's a problem. That's your problem. So I think I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how he ran a business and how he was with people.
At the time,
but he was tough. He was
a tough guy.
World War II sergeant.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he ran a tight ship.
Yeah.
But he had a big heart.
Sounds like it. At some point, you got interested in psychology. When did that happen?
I don't know when this is airing. I've actually got a book.
No, it's appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's June of this year.
2024.
Yeah, it's called Why I Believe. It has a story in it, but I was a competitive golfer when I was growing up, and my dream was...
Competitive in competitions or a competitive guy playing golf?
No, in competition. So I got recruited to play college golf. So I went to SMU, recruited.
SMU would have had a good golf program. Yeah.
And right early freshman year, I had a hand injury. My play was off and on and hampered, and I'd struggled with it for a couple of years. I'd play well and then not well, and had to hang it up at the end of my sophomore year. And I hit bottom. And I really, really got depressed. Like, if I were me now and knew me then, I'd have put me in a hospital.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
How bad was it?
Bad. I write about this in the book. It was bad.
Suicidal bad?
Well, I wouldn't pull the trigger, but I wished I could.
Yeah, just wanted it over.
I couldn't. Oh, it was awful. And so through that process, going through that depression and getting some help and kind of learning about this, I really got interested in everything I was learning about psychology. I came to a deeper faith commitment at that time too. And so I got interested in both kind of spiritual growth and emotional, psychological stuff. And I was an accounting and finance major, and a little at what junior year, people started telling me, you seem to understand. We talk about pride. Have you ever thought about? And those are the books I like to read. So,
so they were telling you who you were and how you were wired and the value that they were seeing in you.
Yeah, and my passion was telling me.
Mm-hmm.
What I like in my off time. What I want to read. Well, I'm reading all these books, and nobody's making me, right?
Yeah.
So I changed majors and decided I'm going to go into clinical psychology.
This is your junior year?
Junior year.
At SMU.
And I was already, had an accounting and finance major, so I had to catch up. And so into college, I took what they call a gap year now, but I took a year out and worked in a psych hospital to really validate this is what I wanted to do. And
at the time, what was a psych hospital?
Well, it's very different.
Very different than it is now.
Yeah, this is in the 18th century. And back then, you're supposed to laugh at that, but you kind of took it as fact. But back then we had an insurance industry, which meant you could actually, if you were depressed or had an eating disorder or addiction, you could get 30 days in a hospital. So it was normal people that, but were struggling with something. So I spent a year in that hospital. My father thought I was crazy, because I always knew. He told me, son, your college is paid for. Your job, my job's to pay for it. Your job's to get the grades and get in. But when you graduate, I'm done. You can come by here for a sandwich, but I'm done.
Right.
So I knew.
Which is a brilliant way to set you up to be ready. You're going to have to jump out of this airplane.
Yeah. And there ain't no chute. So you better build
teach you how to use it.
I'm going to get you on the airplane. You got to bring your parachute.
Yeah, there you go. It's a great way to look at it.
I knew that. But it also meant all my friends are going off to, McKinsey's and IBM's and law school and med school and all this. And I'm going to work as an orderly for $3.33 an hour as a college graduate. My father thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
But he was done. So I had to, moonlight and volunteer and loading furniture at antique shows, whatever I could do to make ends meet.
Is it because you were continuing to get such a good education at the psych hospital?
It was
it was a sponge. You were a sponge.
It was unbelievable. I learned more. It was equivalent of like an internship or residency, the experience I was getting.
Yeah.
I was in all the groups. I was carrying out treatment plans for doctors and all this. So then I go to graduate school and I go into practice and go knocking on doors to get a job. Halfway through, you can practice with a master's degree. So 3 more years.
Practice as a counselor?
The marriage family counselor license.
Gotcha.
There's a lot of master's degree counselors.
Yeah.
So I go knocking
a little bit of hospital background because I'm seeing how it's coming together, knowing you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I go knocking on doors, and where do I get a job? It's a leadership consulting firm.
Were they looking for a young psychologist kid?
They were looking for a clinician because they discovered leaders have issues.
Who knew?
Who knew? And so that was kind of before all the executive coaching stuff we see now, but they're working in teams and with CEOs and high level leaders, and they have stuff and they have soft skills they need to work on and all this stuff. So I started working in that context, but also in a clinical path. And I fell in love with leadership. I did my doctoral dissertation in leadership personality. So I just fell in love with it. So I kind of became sort of morphed into parallel tracks of I had leadership consulting and I also had a clinical track.
Yeah.
So 5 years into practice, my business juices are bored. I'm getting to watch everybody else do it that I work with, but I love the clinical work. So I knew I wanted to do something not else, but in addition to or different. I knew I wanted to stay in the field, but I wanted to do something with a business, experience to it. And I didn't know what that was. And so I'm a person of faith, and I didn't know, but I knew God knew. And so I got a prayer partner who was kind of in the same juncture. And we met weekly for a year and prayed about next steps. And too long to go into, but, and you know, I don't have aluminum foil on my head, but close. God told me I'm to start a faith-based hospital unit.
Now, did anything like that exist?
Well, yeah, the people I had worked with in Texas before I moved to LA for training, there were faith-based hospital units, psych units back then.
Because there's plenty of faith-based medical stuff. That was, the church kind of launched all that stuff.
Well, it was you know, if you look at it from the business, there was a great niche because people, if a Christian got depressed and had to be admitted, they would take their Bible away, you know, because they see that as part of the problem.
Right.
And there's so much religious ideation with people that are, you know, having struggles that in some ways that even help some.
Yeah.
But I wanted faith to be a part of the treatment. I wanted to have, you know, chaplains on the unit. I wanted to be able to teach what your faith actually says about your depression, not, you know, the way you've been doing it. And this is how it goes together with all evidence-based treatments.
Yeah.
Everything that really works in psychology is right out of the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, it's just deeper in terms of techniques and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, connection and boundaries and processing trauma and all that stuff.
Feeling of belonging.
So they needed to learn. They wanted to know their treatment really coincides with their faith. So that's what I wanted to do. So at that time, psychologists couldn't run anything in a medical setting. You could treat people, but the MD world had all the controls of everything. And I wanted to have control so I could build the kind of units that I wanted to build. So I thought, well, how do you control? Well, if you own the hospital, you're in control. So, because I needed control.
Yeah.
So
you wanted to build the entire program.
I wanted to do the milieu, everything. So I went out and raised the money to buy a hospital.
Okay, stop right there, because I've heard you say this before. How did you know how to raise money? Was that did you get that from your dad, or did you see him do that stuff?
I just knew I didn't have any.
And you knew about what it would cost and all.
And I knew that, I don't know where you are in life, but if you've ever heard the phrase, well, it takes money to make money, and people go, well, I don't have any money, so I can't go. It takes money to make money, but it doesn't have to be your money. I mean, people broke start big things all the time.
Yeah.
So you find investors. See, the thing is, if you've got something of value, somebody will pay for that. Somebody will invest in that. And so I knew that this would work, and I had constructed everything we needed to get going. I just didn't have a facility. Well, at that time, you couldn't get a deal to go through because they were too profitable. Nobody would sell. So then I didn't have a facility. This is back to where I think God intervened. I'm sitting at home. I got everything. I got the marketing together. I got the networks. I got the doctors. I have everything. But I don't have a facility. I'm sitting at home one day after praying about this. My phone rings. It was Frank Minerath.
Yeah.
So they had hospital units from the middle of the country over.
From
Dallas,
Mississippi to California?
To Washington. No, the other way.
To the East Coast.
California. They had to the East Coast.
Gotcha.
But they didn't have anything in California. So he calls, and he's one I had worked with back in Dallas at the hospital. It's a 6 year. I hadn't talked to him in 5 or 6 years. And my phone rings, and it's Frank. I said, what are you doing? He said, oh, I'm just checking in on you. What are you up to? I said, well, I'm trying to start a hospital, and I can't get a facility. I got everything else. And he says, well, I got a facility in L.A., just dropped in my lap, and I don't have anything else. Why don't you open up one of ours? I said, I don't want to open up one of yours. I want to do my own. He said, well, maybe we can figure out something. Come to Dallas, and we'll talk about it. And, HCA, they had a lot of hospital units with HCA hospitals and Health Trust and others. And so I went back there, and I said, Frank, I don't want to do one of yours. I want to do mine. So why don't we start a new company, and they were my minority partners. So they brought the facility and a lot of the systems. And then I saw how big this is going to be, so I asked John Townsend to join me. And then they said, well, we should take our syndicated radio show and put it on in an LA market. And Salem Network, which now is this huge network, that was their first station, and they didn't have anybody. They gave us the drive time show, call-in show.
And it was your own show?
Well, not at first. It was Minner's Meyer show getting piped in.
But you were hosting?
No.
Okay.
They were piping in out of Dallas. So then Salem goes, so this is L.A. We need some local talent.
Dallas and L.A. are very different.
Very different. So how about you guys do maybe Monday and Friday? So John and I started doing the Monday and Friday version of the Minner's Meyer show. Well, Salem likes our version better, so they put us on 5 days a week. So then, and by that time, things were, and we had done our first, back to the hospital. I couldn't buy one, so we went knocking on doors, and we found a doctor-owned hospital. These two old Jewish doctors that were interested in these kids, wanted to do something, and, well, we got I think it was pediatrics or obstetrics or something. That unit's not doing too well. We'll give you that one.
Just convert it.
We went, and we knocked on a lot of doors. I mean, and so.
This was you and John?
Yeah. And so we'll take it through licensure with the state, and we'll do some construction and a bunch of, none of this is easy, but.
Yeah.
So we did that one unit. That worked. And then.
How old were you at this point?
20.
Unbelievable.
When I started this.
20 anything.
Late 20s. And so that one worked. And then one of our best people wanted to move to Seattle. Well, all of a sudden Salem said, or it wasn't Salem, it would be Salem, but they had one station. Well, we're going to build a network. We're going to put the show on in Seattle. If we got the show on, then we can send our guy. Let's find a hospital. So we go to Seattle and knock on doors. We find a hospital. Ultimately, we had treatment centers, hospitals and outpatient in about 45 markets in the Western United States.
How long did it take to get to 45?
Washington, Oregon, California, and Nevada.
How long did it take to get to 45 hospitals?
5 years.
And that's incredible. You are 5 days a week, you're on a radio show. And are you
we built a studio in our office. We started this from a broom closet.
Yeah.
Literally a broom closet. We didn't have, we were just psychologists with little cubicles.
Did you have operators running the 45 hospitals for you, and they'd report to you?
Eventually, we built a pretty big company.
It's insane.
We had 200 doctors.
Yeah.
And administrative staff and insurance departments and all that. But not in the beginning. It was me and John and a assistant.
You introduced John Townsend in your story. You guys wrote Boundaries together, which was a big breakout. That book has been in the top couple hundred on Amazon for how long? 20-something years?
It's crazy.
Yeah. How did you meet John?
Funny story. I was a year ahead of him in graduate school, even though he was 4 years older. He had gone to seminary before graduate school. So I volunteered to help move new students in. So they assigned me this guy named Townsend. So taking boxes into his apartment, and I got a box, and there's these back then cassette tapes. And one of them says Hendrix. And I go, because it was weird back then. You didn't see a lot of these uptight Christians who listen to Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and everything I love.
Yeah.
They're all into their Christian music. And so I go, oh, you like Hendrix? And he goes, yeah, he was my favorite professor at Dallas.
I was about to say, which Hendrix is he talking about?
And he kind of saw the forlorn look on. He goes, what? And I said, oh, I was kind of showered. Yeah. I said, I thought you meant Jimmy. And he says, you like Hendrix? I said, he said, come here. And he pulls out this library. And so we bonded over rock and roll.
Ah, gotcha.
But we started talking, and John was the one person in graduate school, not that there weren't others, but who had both the psychological expertise and the theological chops to really think about these issues in an integrative way. And so we just, for the rest of graduate school, we would just talk about model building and all this kind of stuff. And so when I saw that the radio show was going to make this thing big, I go, I need somebody to help me. So I brought John in. And so we built it together.
Did you guys write Boundaries before that or after?
No. So I had been doing a lot of work on a model that I developed that an organization made me write because I had been teaching it with training and leadership and stuff. And they said, is this written down anywhere? And I said, no. And they go, well, we need you to write a book on this so we can scale it. And I go, I don't know how to write a book. I mean, I couldn't.
Yeah.
I said, I don't know how to write a book. I can't do that. They hired a consultant to lock me up in a room to get a book out of me.
In one of your hospitals?
No, well, by then I guess I had started. So I wrote that book. It's called Changes That Heal.
Yeah.
The second section of Changes That Heal is boundaries. So we were teaching that model in the hospitals, and we started doing seminars by then, all-day events, and we produced 24 of them a year all over the country, and we're teaching this. And so we're at a planning day with a consultant, and he says, so when y'all do your seminars, what are most of the questions about? We just start laughing. It's always boundaries.
Yeah.
He said, why don't you write a book on boundaries? And I started laughing. I said, that's a good idea because we write the book. We want to answer these questions. We can stop talking about it.
Yeah.
And that was to solve.
Fortunately, that wasn't the case.
So, but that's how that happened. So then, long story short,
well, I want to know
over the years,
you guys have a radio show. You got 45 hospitals. You got a best-selling book. No, that's true now. You and John are still friends, but how did you dissolve that and pivot? Because now we're pivoting into what you're doing now.
Okay, so while I'm doing all that, we're running a pretty significant sized company at this point. So I'm really in business, but it's a clinical company. So I'm designing treatment plans and being in a hospital for several days a week. So I'm still in both worlds. And then managed care, started moving into the insurance world and just gutted the psychiatric industry because insurance companies started picking up the managed care model. And how do they make money? Deny treatment. I mean, you call your doctor, no, we don't authorize that, And so our length of stay went from average 30 days down to 5 days. You could just medicate people and get them out. Now, it's still a good business, profitable and all that, but it wasn't why I went into it.
Yeah.
Just to stabilize people. We wanted to help them change lives. So I said, this is not fun anymore. So we sold the company. And at that point, I'm kind of sitting back going, what do I want to do next? Well, the hospital industry had been gutted in the way I wanted to do it. But what I really loved was the content, and I love helping people. And I was doing a lot of work with leaders, and I really loved, if you're a golf coach, you coach Tiger, you get to be around what you love, and you get to see great people do it. And so I said, you know what? I don't want to run anything anymore right now. I'm just going to set up a little boutique leadership, CEO coaching teams, organization, little boutique practice, doing that. And so that's what I did. I kind of pivoted out of something into something I was already doing, but focused on that. So I changed focus. But at this time, the publishing brand on the self-help stuff was established. So I was continuing to write and work in that area, but I never had published anything on the business leadership side. So I went and got a New York agent that would, kind of out of the Christian world. And
outside of the Christian world, you got an agent who was a Christian. You got an agent. You wanted to sort of branch outside of
an agent that didn't focus on Christian publishing.
But why was that? Was that a strategically good move?
Absolutely. Now I loved my agent that did all my Christian books, but in that market, they're dealing mostly with Christian publishers. And, he does other things as well. But I wanted somebody that when they went and knocked on the door of Harper Business, for example, they're not seeing choir robes on me. So it's really about, I had to brand what I do in leadership. This isn't Christian work. I'm talking about serious leadership consulting. So I wanted a leadership book. So I had taught leadership in a graduate school of business, and had taught stuff in organizations. So I knew what I wanted to write first. And so we pitched that first book. It's called Integrity. And Harper Business published it. And the New York Times got a hold of it and called it the best leadership book of the bunch that had come out at that time. And that sort of started this business leadership publishing brand.
That was really the pivot. And then
that was
just because we're talking on the Coach Builder channel to mostly coaches, what sort of menu of products did you create at that time? I mean, you had insurance was paying for people to stay in your hospitals, and that was kind of the business model. Now you've moved to a coaching/consulting.
Well, that in an events,
and so the events was part of it. You kept doing the events then, even after Integrity came out.
What was the timing on that? Yeah, for a while. When we sold the company, we kept the events division and still produced citywide events for a number of years. That was mostly in the faith world. When I pivoted from there, we had created a lot of products. Back to the product question, we had a website that sold. It's like the old tape club or CD club.
Yeah,
we had subscribers, and we were doing a weekly live presentation locally that was broadcast through satellite to 5,000 churches every week. We did that for 17 years.
Wow.
So we had mountains of talks and content in every area of life. So we had digitized that, had a website, and so that was the product stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of in the product business, but then eventually all that went away with streaming.
Yeah. Were there people who you were doing one-on-one coaching with? Were there people who were hiring you? So that was
I've been doing that since
the beginning of time.
Well, since the beginning of having anything that was worth listening to. You got to get out of your skis in the beginning a little bit, but I've been doing it for a while, and then just focus. A lot of this, John, it's really about focus.
Yeah.
When and to coaches, I think a lot of these pivots were really things that I was doing where, as I said, I kind of didn't pivot into something new. I took something that was already working and focused on that. And it's like Jim Collins, don't fire cannonballs, fire bullets. And so you're all do, so even in your coaching, there's something you do better than a bunch of other stuff.
Right.
And when you start to focus and take all that time and energy, I wrote a book on necessary endings about, it's basically the 80-20 rule, right? That 20% of everything is probably where, 80% of the energy.
Your revenue, your meaning, your fulfillment, all that's coming.
So focus was a big part of this.
Keep continuing by that.
That's my biggest problem.
Your biggest problem. Continuing to kill off as much of the 80% as you can, and just refine.
Focus, and when you focus, it grows. You're watering it. New channels open up. You start playing in an area. My biggest problem is, and I don't want to get rid of it, but it is a big problem. So I have to focus at a meta level on really the expertise and the concepts. But my life, people say, how do you become an author? I go, I'm really not an author. I'm not. Or how do I become a speaker? I'm not really a speaker. I'm a practitioner. So I still spend probably 80 days a year in war rooms with CEOs and their companies. And that work creates a lot of content and concepts. So the second column is I spend
Share what you learned.
creating content. And then the third column is, well, people got to know about that, so you got to do podcasts and platform speaking and all that. But it's all related. If I focused on one of them, I wouldn't like it because I'd miss the others.
Yeah.
So my biggest problem is juggling all three, but they are all related. So
Yeah.
it's not like apples and oranges.
I want to cover one last quadrant, if you will. Family. You got married in your 30s, right? Yeah. You got married in your 30s. And you've obviously...
I could have held out longer. I found out later.
Too.
I didn't have you coaching me.
No regrets. But,
By the way, single people, Don will validate this. Everybody, a lot of times you talk to singles there about, like, are you kidding me? Worst thing about getting married is you got to stop dating. That's so much fun. Tori and I both always say this. Only one bad thing about it.
Can't date anymore.
Can't date. Enjoy your single years.
Yeah, you wrote a book about that too, boundaries and dating, and how to get a date worth keeping.
Yeah, both of those are important. Some people can't get dates, but then once they're against it, aren't worth keeping.
I think it's how to get a date worth keeping. It might have been boundaries and dating, but I mean that young women when I was
dating
courting my wife Betsy. When I was courting my wife Betsy, if you will.
One day I'm going to interview him.
The practical advice in that book was unbelievably helpful. A lot of women read that book. Can you tell me which one it was? They read that book and they realized they were turning guys off.
Oh, absolutely.
And the first chapter was like, you're telling everybody you're not interested in dating, and that means they don't want to date you. This is why you can't get a date. Isn't that the first part of that book?
Yeah, you're waiting on God to bring you the one.
Well, with her.
I told one.
In a few different ways.
I told one lady she called in a radio show. She said, I can't believe you're telling people to go date. God's going to bring my maid and all this. I go, well, don't you have to do anything?
How's that working out?
Well, that's what I go, do you have to leave the house? And she goes, I think God could bring him to my front door. I said, lady, you don't want to marry the FedEx guy or Jehovah's Witness. You better go outside.
The guy fixing
You're not going to get out there and hang out and do stuff you like. You'll
figure out what you want.
They will emerge.
How did you manage all of the success? And no doubt there were demands on your time. You have 2 wonderful young adult daughters now who are doing extremely well. And but how did you stay a good dad and manage all of this going on at the same time?
Well, can we pretend I'm a good dad?
You're a great dad. Then your daughters would say so.
Well, I had the benefit of wisdom. Now, not because I'm wise, but I became wise because by that time I had been around a lot of good dads.
Yeah. Including your dad.
Including my dad. But around a lot of high performers that do a lot of stuff who were good dads, and around a lot of them who weren't. And the wisdom of getting to watch them really helped me.
So how old were you when you got married?
Ultimately, 39.
And then you became a dad at?
44.
Yeah.
So I met her. That's another
It's a great story. I've heard this story. It's amazing.
I won't tell the whole story, but we, I met her 4 years before we got married. So, but I got to watch dads, and so it's really, the way you talk about coaching and leadership development and all that, when you become a parent and you have all this other stuff to do, and my values are, families first. And so I had to add structure to my whole scenario because without kids, your time is you and your wife and your business, and it's all over the place. But when they come in the picture, I realized, time is a finite commodity. And so out of that bucket, there's several stakeholders that eat from that bucket. And there's the family, there's the marriage, there's your business, there's your health and all of that. And I just realized that I learned from others, your family is the most important thing you have, period. So the most important thing should get the first of the bucket. So what we would always do is, late in the year, put the family time in the calendar for the next year first.
How brilliant.
First.
Yeah, helpful.
So, we'd always have a spring break trip. We'd want to take the kids on, and then Tori and I would do something, and then we built in regular Tori and I get away times.
Without the kids.
Without the kids. We built in a Thursday night date night where the babysitter was on contract. She shows up if you're going out to dinner, babysitter shouldn't show up at 7. They show up at 4:30.
That's right.
So you don't have to go through the witching hour of bath time and all that stuff. Who wants to go out?
Yeah.
So they would show up every Thursday night. And even if you're in a fight, you're going out.
Yeah.
So that became a structure in our life. And then we had the babysitter show up on Sunday afternoon at 2. And we come back after the kids are in bed. You got to recover from the weekend, right?
Yeah.
And so structures like that. And then as the kids got older, we'd have family meetings. And so at family meeting, just like you run a team, right? You go around. So what did everybody do well this week that everybody loved and helped, and you want them to do more of it or keep doing that? And what did everybody do that you didn't like, and we need to work on that? And you learn to give and take feedback and all that kind of stuff. But I would also say to the kids, we're planning the calendar. So what's the right number of nights that I'm away, and it's not a big deal? And I mean, in any family, that's going to be,
I would imagine that
4 to 5.
Thursday and that Sunday help a lot.
Yeah, they had
the vacations that you got.
But every parent, whether you have business travel like I did or not, I mean, you're out one night or 2 nights or whatever. But the kids, there's a sort of an algorithm of this. I would ask them, when do you start to feel it? When do you start to feel like, where's Dad? Why? And so they would give me a number. And I would live by that number. And I said, okay, let's take the number, let's put it over 2 months, because maybe it's a few more nights here if it doesn't exactly work out, or to be whatever, or, the weeks. But they always knew they were in charge of it, or it could speak into it.
Yeah.
I think. And to answer your question, that, and also, I have never had as much fun doing anything. I mean, when our girls got to be teenagers, or after they were teenagers, or done, now, I guess, people say, oh, I got my girls are becoming teenagers, or boys, or what. And I'll tell them, I have never had as much fun as raising teenagers. It's the most fun I've ever had. It doesn't have to be awful, but that's part of it. I think you gotta either love it or learn to love it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying it's all fun,
yeah,
right? Or all easy, but there's nothing with the rewards.
Yeah.
I mean, you know that.
Boundaries, necessary endings. These are books. Trust, changes that heal, integrity, safe people, how people grow, never go back. I didn't even write down how to get a day worth keeping. There's more than that. You've got a platform called boundaries.me where a lot of your wisdom is shared for, in my opinion, pennies a month, a few dollars, however much it is. Did your dad ever see who you were going to become? Before he passed away, was there ever a moment when he realized this kid's exceptional?
Well, my dad was a golfer. And he used to go to my tournaments. There's some highlights in that I won't go into sometimes. It was kind of big deals. But I think I always kind of felt a little bit like that's something I was doing that he really loved. And I remember the hardest call I ever had to make was because of my injury, and I had to quit. And so I think that was the first experience of, he got to see some stuff that was going well. Years later, when I was in private practice, he lives across the country. I'd go home. I didn't really understand. But when things started getting more public facing and running a real business and all that, he lived to 94. So
yeah,
I was fortunate.
Yeah. I would imagine he could not have been more proud of you. It must have been pretty incredible for him. So
we'll ask him one day.
The biggest fear in my life.
He wasn't. I don't mean to paint the picture of, he was all softball.
No,
he was tough.
I'm sure.
But, I look back and all the parenting research, if you want to sum it all up, same thing in companies. The healthiest kids and the healthiest companies have two things. They have high warmth and high support, which my dad was, and they have high expectations. Now, you have high expectations without support, and whatever, you're going to either depress them or make them rebel. You have high warmth and high support without expectations, they're going to be on your couch at 40 playing video games.
Yeah.
So I think he did both of those really well.
Well, Henry, thanks for turning around and giving back. It's one thing to succeed. It's another thing to turn around and say, okay, here's how you can do it.
Well, it's I love to see people, in your whole coaching thing. I mean, what's cooler than seeing somebody with an unrealized dream and you looking at them and say, you can do that. You just got to do it in this way. And that's what you guys do. And when people learn, it's not a mystery that things succeed. It's just that a lot of people, they know what they do. They just don't know the science of how you make something succeed. Mm-hmm. And that's what you do. And it's what all of you coaches, what's more fun? It's more fun than winning your own game is to watch somebody that you help win theirs. Gosh, that's as cool as it gets.
Thanks for coming by today.
Good to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Cloud, for sitting down today. This is a man who has changed my life. An honor just to sit down with one of my heroes. And again, Dr. Cloud, thank you so much. If there was a controlling idea, if there was something for us to learn from the life Dr. Cloud has lived as it relates to building a coaching business, it's this: monetize your curiosity. Yes, he monetizes his wisdom, but he stayed curious about what makes you tick, what makes you better, what makes you healthy, what makes relationships better. He just stayed curious about that. When he found an answer, he was able to turn that into products. That's another thing that he was able to do, all the way into a hospital system. He turned those products into ways to influence hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and that's how he changed so many lives. Listen, if you give free advice, you're probably going to be able to help one person at a time. And at the end of your life, you may really help 20 or 30 or 50, or at best 100, 150, something like that. But if you're able to monetize that advice in the form of products, systems and processes that people can interact with and roll out, you potentially could change millions of lives for the better. If you want to know how to do more of that, grab my book, Coach Builder. It teaches you a playbook that you can use to monetize your wisdom to help millions of people. So grab Coach Builder today. All right, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Master Coach. Until next time, God bless and be well.